Okay, and we have a special guest which was not announced. Professeur Bouchard, bonjour. Ça fait plaisir de vous rencontrer encore une fois. Okay, everybody. So, Janet and Frédéric, I know. Sorry, it wasn't in my notes. Donc, Frédéric Bouchard, Janet Halliwell, over to you.
Thank you all, and good morning. Some of us were here very early, and I'm joined on the stage with two of my colleagues, Frédéric Bouchard, who of course is unknown to all of you, and Jim Ghadbane, who you can't keep from actually contributing to almost any discussion and dialogue. So thank you both for agreeing to my last-minute invitation. What we are doing today is reporting out on the board chair's discussion, which we've had for about an hour yesterday and 2 hours this morning. And I will have to say that summarizing and synthesizing that is a job that I'm not in any way prepared to do effectively. So what I'm going to be doing is getting my colleagues to speak to particular aspects of it. Our agenda was really looking at governance, governance writ large of the portfolio, governance writ more narrowly on MSI, initially looking at what I'll call some of the pain points and the issues of tension, the areas that we feel really need to have a little bit more attention, but also, and I think most importantly, looking at the overall value for Canadians of the assets that are funded by Canadians. These are national research in facilities, resources, infrastructures. So I'm going to get my colleagues to speak to that initially, and then just at the end, I want to take you through the conversation that has been developing over the last decade and give you a feeling for where it will be going in the future. This is an issue that is top of mind for many and not just those in this room. But first, let me just turn the floor over to Frédéric, who's going to talk a little bit about where we are thinking we should be going in terms of our policy perspectives.
Thank you. So I'm here with different hats. So actually, I'm here with one hat, but it's informed by previous experiences. So I have the pleasure of chairing Érudit and co-chairing Coalition Publica. Basically, well, you've talked about this yesterday, I'm sure, so I won't go through the details of what we do, but what I'm saying here is informed as chair, but as with the experience of the report. And I don't assume, we didn't have time to agree amongst all the chairs on every single point. So I'm just raising kinds of overall, big thinking that we seem to converge on, and maybe we can discuss this further. So the idea is that in the MRF framework that was in that was in the report, but that was circling in various levels through ISET and finance for a number of years. One of the key ideas was of a portfolio approach, is that you have, these national infrastructures that have different roles in different science communities with different stakeholders. But the overall logic for any country, actually, but for Canada in particular, is how do we stop seeing them as individual projects that are funded for a few years and assume that, they disappear or that other money appears, but have a kind of an overall architecture that sees the complementarity of these different infrastructures over a national or portfolio. And the logic of that, and this is, we don't have to wait for a national science strategy to be devised, but it is a key part of a national science strategy, right? So if you have a national science strategy, then you look how your different funding agencies, your different funding instruments, your different research assets, work towards a national science strategy. And whatever a national science strategy could look like, we know that looking at other countries, there's always something like, national research infrastructure. That doesn't mean federal research infrastructure. There's a diversity of models across the world, but the idea is you've got a portfolio of research assets, research infrastructures that support your national science strategy. So thinking in terms of a portfolio of research major, I'll talk about MSI to make it simple. A portfolio, and here the analogy with finance will only take you so far, but apologies, but just a nice way of showing this. But if you've got a portfolio, well, you've got investments in emerging markets, you've got investments in real estate, you've got different types of assets, and you're not surprised that they're different, right? Because some are riskier scientifically, some are, more stable, but at the portfolio, at the national level, you want a healthy portfolio covering different sectors, covering different temporal frames, different technologies, different sectors. And thinking, and here, without prejudging what a national strategy, science strategy would look like, and how a portfolio of major science initiative portfolio approach would look like, chances are there would be something like, prosperity, well-being, health, national interest, national security, national autonomy. I wouldn't have put the word autonomy, but the last few weeks have kind of raised that to the issue, right? But that becomes kind of an issue here. And also the influence that this activity grants you across the world, right? Science diplomacy, trade, and so on. So looking at, and there could be other aspects, right? I'm not assuming, this is not exhaustive, but it's when you look at how Germany defines, science interest, and, these are the terms that come up one way or the other. So looking at this way, a portfolio, what this would grant us, and I'll conclude with this idea, is that once you think in terms of a portfolio of MSI, first I should point out that the portfolio is already being built. When you look at the last federal budget and the few MRFs that were designated for funding, in some sense, the portfolio already exists, and it's just that some parts have been, explicitly designed and supported. But what would help us, and this among the chairs, that's what we were discussing, is that we need more clarity on the follow-through on the building on this portfolio. And then you have other benefits from this, the discussions that it allows with our host institutions, with our provinces, in terms of risk and liabilities, because then it's not a project, right? It's an asset. The words don't matter. If you don't like the financial language, use other things. But it becomes a part of an overall portfolio and not just a project that's cool and neat when you have, a good research team, right? So the questions of liability, of risk, and also of governance, and this is something we talked a lot about, is there's a great diversity of governance models across the MSIs. And there are advantages and disadvantages to these things, and maybe we'll get back to that point. But it helps us chart the way forward. Once you have a portfolio, then you can think about, okay, well, you want to de-risk individual host institutions or individual projects or individual infrastructure, but also you can think about technological development, improvement, evolution of scientific programming, and so on. But you need this commitment to our portfolio, and so we should not be seen as in competition, right? But as essential part of our portfolio. So real estate is not in competition with emerging markets, right? Real estate does in a portfolio, in an investment portfolio, it has a role to play, right? In the terms of return on investment, if you will, that emerging markets won't play, and emerging markets does something else. So we need to see our MSIs as part of an overall portfolio. And speaking with Sylvain earlier, this would help us greatly from MSI, from CFI, or from the federal government, the commitment to a portfolio approach would, it won't solve everything, but it would help us discuss sustainability, predictability, evolution, and so on, because we wouldn't be seen as individual things here. And I'll end by, and I'm not just doing this politely, but thank you very much to CFI, not just for the financial support, but the moral support. It's been extremely important for furthering our activities. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I agree on the last point that Frédéric made. Like I think we are all here because of the work that the CFI has actually enabled, and I think we should all support them and thank them for that. I think that's we sometimes take for granted. I know we've had this conversation at the ONC board that I'm the chair of, Jim Ghadbane, former president of CANARIE. And in many respects, you can easily ignore the main funding in pursuit of match funding, and I make it clear to the board that we shouldn't take for granted the value that the CFI is providing us. And so I 100% echo the sentiment of Frédéric. The discussion amongst board chairs is a fascinating one. You start with a conversation with people who are on the chairs of a vast, incredible variety of major science initiatives, and you start by thinking, wow, there's a lot of differences, and the reality is we all have similar problems, the same problem, but that might manifest itself in different ways. One of the things that's I think is true, not having been part of the origin of the MSIs, is they all seem to have had a very organic start. Principal investigator had an idea, maybe Dr. McDonald maybe was the founder of the idea about let's create a facility to do neutrino experimentation. It starts from a PI having an idea, and you end up creating a structure that was grown up organically. We're at a very good inflection point now, and I say a very, very good inflection point in that the signaling from the federal government is we actually prefer to have a little bit more long-term planning going on here rather than just having it continue to evolve organically with solving today's problem, not thinking about where we're going. So included in the conversation the board chairs had around current challenges, there was a discussion around could we start to think about what a future state might look like. We want a portfolio of major science facilities, and I use that term because whether it's funded under an MSI or an MRF, they are all currently major science facilities. You say that, well, okay, so if we're looking at it from a portfolio perspective, what's the attribute? What are the attributes, collection of attributes of a successful major science facility? Is it relevant to the science that's going on? Is it relevant to the country? Is it relevant to people who want to provide funding? So relevance is a key attribute of a successful major science facility. But that's not enough. Does it have a sustainable funding strategy? Is it producing the kind of value to society? Is it well governed? Is there in the governance model clear understanding of how every step in the governance model is adding to the success of the facility? And so these are all the things that the board chairs were discussing around. We need to know where we are in order to move forward, but we all should figure out where we want to end up so that we have a beacon that says we're trying to get to a collective of major science facilities that have the attributes of successful science facilities to create a portfolio to drive socioeconomic benefit to the country. And the message, and one of the things we have to maybe step up our marketing game, because the message has to be clear to anyone. You have to be able to, you know, I shared this story, and Alex Bushell, who's in the audience at CANARIE had we had a speaker at one of our conferences who we found in Europe from the Czech Republic, and he does a science show. He does a science show on television. He said, like, you know, other countries have tried to do science shows. Science shows generally fail because, you know, for the most part, the scientists want to talk about the science and they're very excited and passionate about it. But if you're, you know, watching television, why would you watch that? And he said the thing they did, the approach they took to make it successful was it has to make sense to a 12-year-old, because that makes the message accessible to the broadest audience possible. And so if we think about, like, I have a very compelling message about why I'm on the board of ONC that I will tell anybody, you know, and it's very easy. I think everybody understands the importance of the oceans, correct? And I think we have to get to that level of understanding so that the people who are funding these, which are the hardworking citizens of this country, that are being, then the decision being made by the politicians in terms of where they should be directing the money. The message of the importance of a portfolio of major science facilities has to be accessible to anybody. And to me, that's also a key success factor in a good major science facility. So, you know, there was a great presentation yesterday about impact, and you know, we can talk about short-term deliverables, research papers and the like, but then that's the what. We have to I think we have to start working a lot harder on the so what. And the so what has to be, this is why it matters to society. And I'll stop there. I don't know if we have time for questions, but the last thing I'm going to say is there was a comment made by one of the participants who has been in the system for a while. And he said, it's probably one of the most inspiring conversations we've had, because we're at a very strong inflection point, courtesy of the CFI and the direction it's received from the minister, to really propel this in a direction that is going to take us to a better state as far as our science facilities are concerned. So.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I just want to start with that recognition of an inflection point, because we are truly at, I think, a point where we are moving into a new era in our discussion, our conversation on national research infrastructures. And it's been a conversation that's been building over at least 10 years. And I just want to take you through a little bit of the history and then look at the future. Because there is, I think, a very promising future, but we have to continue on that track of demonstrating the value, articulating the value, supporting CFI in their ability to say why we make a difference for Canadians. But going back, we have a conversation that started, of course, with the Naylor report, where they recognized the need to look at some of our major research infrastructures differently. But then Frédéric's panel and his report went to a lot more detail in terms of the way in which we could move forward with a portfolio approach, with a life cycle approach. That conversation has been deepened in many ways. One was with a letter that came from the board chairs after the 2023 meeting, which advocated very simply for release of the MRF framework, recognizing that it would trigger and support a larger discussion over time, not just for the larger, very high, I'll call it high-risk facilities and resources, but for the entire portfolio and those that are not even in the portfolio as yet. There have been 2 discussions at Canadian Science Policy Council, the first in 2023, which talked about what should be in the framework, and Art MacDonald was on that one. And then another in 2024, and Art was again on that one, as was Natalie Harrower, who's in this room, where we talked about some of the aspects of how it could be implemented. And these, I think, are important elements. But there is more to come. The CCA has a major review or assessment underway right now, the state of science, technology, and innovation in Canada. And as part of that, it was able to get funding from SSHRC for some commissioned papers. One of those commissioned papers was looking at the landscape of research infrastructures in this country, doing a bit of a comparison of how we look at that portfolio and the strategy relative to other countries. Are there best practices that we could look at? And their issues of road mapping and a landscape analysis were put on paper. There's also a section looking at what difference did this make? What are the impacts, both on the science system, or what I call the intrinsic, and then the socioeconomic dimensions and environmental dimensions, the extrinsic values and impacts. So there's a start of that discussion. That is just one part of the conversation, because as Jeff Kinder said yesterday, the CCA is launching yet another assessment on national research infrastructures. And Janet King, in this room somewhere, is going to be the chair of that. So, Janet, this is going to be a wonderful ride, but it is scheduled to report in 2026. So there will be a national conversation that's continuing, and I'm sure that you will all have a chance to give some thought to that and ensure that your thoughts are also shared with the panel chair. So that's enough for us. I haven't told the board chairs yet or asked them, but I would very much hope that we will continue to work as a collective. We'll be sharing thoughts and with you in the next few weeks, so keep tuned.
Oh, sorry.
Possible to ask a question? I'm just wondering the degree to which the board chairs had discussed attempting to draw the granting councils into this idea of portfolio and life cycle style. We have CFI doing a very good job in approaching this, but granting councils are not represented here today, and it's another very important element of success for all of these major research facilities. I think if there's an inclination from the community that it's important for the granting councils to be involved, that would help a lot in terms of getting this to happen, perhaps.
Well, I will confess it didn't come on the table this morning, but that's not terribly surprising. I think everybody has assumed that the importance of collaboration and interaction with them, which has come through the what we heard conversations and report, is absolutely there. So I don't think any of the board chairs would dissent from that perspective.
So just to be clear, yeah, it's a great question, Dr. McDonald. I mean, I think everybody is looking for sort of a comprehensive approach to science. I will add that it didn't actually come up in discussion with the board chairs, because in the conversations we had with Sylvain, he was already stating that he was already moving in that direction, and rather than actually jumping in ahead of that, we thought we would just support him in that activity. So he's already having the conversations with all the various people. So if you think that there are things we should be doing more explicitly as a collective of board chairs, then share that with us, but we would still follow the lead of the CFI.
I think the idea that this is not just a CFI topic is something that is very worth supporting.
Yeah.
And the councils can do it. And the other element of this that was a part of Art Carty's 2005 element, for example, was having the provinces involved.
Yes.
They were at the table in those discussions. And that's a big topic, particularly if the matching stays as strong on capital as it is right now. So there's more to it than just CFI, even though CFI, Sylvain, is doing a fantastic job of trying to push this forward. They could use support, I think.
The concept of bringing the provinces to the table was certainly on our agenda. We simply didn't get to it, but that is something it is on our agenda. But Frédéric.
This is, it's going to happen one way or another, the tri-council part. The provinces, to me, that's a separate discussion because it's much more intricate and in some sense, you know, I think it's necessary, but I'm not as confident as to how it will unfold. But the discussion between CFI and the tri-councils, and again, capstone, no capstone, like it doesn't matter in one way or another. It's as soon as you commit to a portfolio approach, in one way or another, you have to develop better linkages between the funding agencies and CFI vis-a-vis MSI, because you have, you know, the research activity, you want some research funding for the professionals who work at the MSI. I mean, a lot of it kind of just derives from the portfolio approach. So we did not discuss it explicitly this morning for the link with the Tri-Council, but I think many of us, and you alluded to this earlier, is that to me, it's not a question of whether, it's a question of how and when, because it's, you know, you can't have a pool without a lifeguard, right? You can't have a lifeguard without a pool, right? At some point, if you say we're going to have parks and we're going to have resources, you have to make sure that, you know, whoever funds the pool, you know, has to ensure that there's a lifeguard so the swimmers can have fun in the pool. And so, but if you don't have a portfolio approach and just focus on the project, and this is something that the chairs, you know, and you know this, all of our executive teams do this on a daily basis. Chairs just come in every once in a while, like, you know, just leaves during the fall. You know, so you do this every single day, but you're making it, you know, thrive every single day with the conditions of the day. That's not a serious way to handle major sites, you know, facilities, you know, in the long term. But just having kind of the vision, what we have to build towards, then it's much, much easier to discuss our activities beyond a project-based. And so the tri-councils will have to be part of the conversation, but it's a how and when, not whether. And CFI and tri-councils, in some sense, have been doing it without government supervision, but now I think we're at another phase of that work.
As you said yourself, there seems to be a spirit of cooperation between the provinces right now on another topic, but at least there's a spirit of cooperation.
That's right, that's new.
To take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Good point.
Okay, so on that, thank you. Thank you to the planned guests and the unplanned guests. And it's now the coffee break. You have till 10:30.